This week on BSDNow, Allan and I are back from MeetBSD. A good time was had by all. We have lots to discuss, so let's jump right into it on your place to be, SD. BSDNow, episode 168, the post-show show, recorded November 16th, 2016. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
I'm glad to have you with us this week. So Allan and I are both back from MeetBSD, hence the title of this week's episode. Mm-hmm. And it was a very good trip. We were talking a little bit about it before the show started here, but man, we were tired. It was a busy conference, I think. I was telling Allan, I didn't even turn my laptop on at the hotel. To give you an idea, like I didn't get any email done or work done because I was just, by the time I got back to the hotel, I was done. It was just a busy day. There were so many people to talk to, and I'm a natural introvert, so that takes a lot of energy out of somebody like me to be able to sit and have all those conversations all day. Not that I didn't want to have them. It was really good. It was a great show. I got to meet a lot of you guys there. I think there was maybe 6 people I talked to who were BSDNow listeners who came because we were talking about it on the show, which was fantastic. I love that we're seeing that more and more and more at all these conferences we go to. I've noticed a trend. It seems to be picking upwards. So we'll see how many of you guys come out to Asia BSDCon. It'll be the next big one if any of you guys make it out to that. Which, speaking of which, I just booked my tickets, Allan. So I think, did I beat you this year?
No, I booked in October.
You kill me. I'm getting it so early.
I had the dates before they were public. I cheated.
That's true. Well, I did too, but I hesitated and waited until he announced it officially. But yeah, I'm all booked up. So,
and actually, I leave on I leave to get there on the Friday, so I'll arrive Saturday, like a week before the conference, basically.
Oh yeah, you're gonna have lots.
It was like a couple $100 cheaper to fly on the Friday instead of on the weekend or the Monday, and basically the cost of the hotel room was for the extra nights was less than the price of the ticket, and I was like,
sure, I'm
not going to complain about having to spend 2 extra days in Japan.
Oh, so you're going to be over all the jet lag while us poor sods are all nodding off, trying to.
Well, I know, like last year we talked about getting there a day or two early to do more touristy stuff because we tried to do stuff on the last day. We had not enough time.
Yep. No. So I'm coming in. Let's see. I leave Monday, arrive Tuesday. Conference starts Thursday.
Yep.
Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then leave Monday again. Yep. So it's my typical 1 week in Japan, which is enough time. It'll be fun and all that. So hopefully more of you will be able to come out to that as well too. I know it's going to be a good conference. I need to turn in my paper now. That reminds me.
The deadline for the proposals is December 26th. The requirement is an extended abstract, which is like 2 pages of the 10-page paper, kind of outlining what the paper is going to be about so they can decide to accept it. Although I tend to try to write the whole paper by then because my nightmare scenarios get accepted and then suddenly don't have the time to finish writing the paper in time. And their deadline for the papers is sooner because they have to get them printed physically and bound into a book that's given away to everybody that comes to the conference.
Which is very fancy. I don't know of any other conference I've been to that does that yet.
Yeah,
it's
like some of the Usenix ones, but I think they just mostly do it electronically now. But especially being in Asia, where a lot of people don't speak English as their first language, being able to read the content at a slower pace, or reread it, or look up words or whatever, makes it a lot easier for people to understand. And I also just like it because it's something to read on the plane home too. But just some of the a 45-minute talk can't cover the same amount of detail as a 10-page paper either.
Sure. Well, and there's just a lot of talks where it's like, I know I wanted to go to that, but get
there's
busy.
2 or 3 rooms at once. I can't do that.
Exactly. So sometimes you need that so you can go back and refer to it later. Yep. Okay, this is what I missed.
Yep.
But it should be a good one. So encourage you guys to get yourselves booked and start thinking about your trip out there next year. And of course, Allan and I will be there.
Yes.
All right. Well, we should probably get into the news. We got other stuff to talk. This wasn't even planned.
We could finish talking about MeetBSD still. There was quite a bit of stuff.
That's true. We got MeetBSD stuff. So okay, what do you want to go over first?
Well, I was just
Dev Summit was fun.
The Dev Summit was pretty good. We had some important talks we got to do.
We did the whole have, need, want thing,
Yep.
and I was gonna almost throw out OpenRC as a have, but I didn't feel comfortable until we finished, really porting everything over and have tested it and are actually using it in production. Maybe for a BSD can or Asia, I'll throw that out as we have this now if people want to try it. Which I had several people ask me about that, if that's something they could pull in.
Yep.
So
I know that there was a small breakout group discussing the graphics driver stuff. There was groups about storage, about networking, and a bunch of other stuff. I didn't actually get to go to one of the networking ones I wanted to because I was in one of the other ones, but lots of good stuff.
Extremely busy. The talks were good. Let's see. The hallway track was interesting. There was always people in the hall chatting, and outside the conference there was neat.
Yeah, a bunch of us kind of took over the staging room and had a cluster admin meeting and then kind of hung out there for a while. Then you did your talk unveiling TrueOS. That was quite good. And then
that was fun.
And then I did led a ZFS discussion panel. Sadly, Matt Aarons couldn't make it on the second day, but he was there for the first day where he gave his talk. But I managed to rope Pavel Doedek into it, and then I had already had Josh Fetzel and Dan Langill scheduled to help me. So the four of us answered questions, and it was great. Pavel got to tell some cool stories from initially porting ZFS, including, he told most of that story to us when we interviewed him back in 2013, was it? No, 2014.
It's been a few years.
It was in Bulgaria. Yeah. But he also answered the question, what motivated him to look at it in the first place? And that was a cool story.
Yeah, I mean, you messed a lot of good stuff. Although I did talk to Cow Pham, who was doing the AV, and he did say that the videos should be up relatively soon. He said he'll start doing them probably end of this week, and he'll do a few each week because there's a little bit of post-production editing they have to do to get them prepped to go online. But it does sound like in the next couple of weeks you should start having a bunch of videos to watch. So keep your eyes peeled for that, and I'm sure we'll mention it here on the next episode if they start appearing.
Yeah, because there's a bunch of these that I didn't get to see because I was in the hallway or whatever.
Yeah, same here. There was just too much going on, but sounded like everything was very well received, and definitely a lot of good talks. It was a large crowd too. I heard 200 plus people were there, which I think might have been the largest MeetBSD ever. Although, looking at the location, being at the birthplace of BSD, it was kind of unique and cool. Yeah. So I think a lot of people came out.
And the facility was great for it. There was enough room.
Facilities were fine.
Everything worked. It had a great hallway. Just, the hallway was just wider than sometimes.
I'll give him credit. The Wi-Fi wasn't half bad either, aside from blocking just about every port.
Well, I think it was mostly blocking UDP was what people were bothered about. It's like you can SSH out, but you can't mosh out.
Yeah. No, it's OpenVPN for the win.
Well, as long as you set it to TCP, not UDP.
True. Which is luckily our default was set up, so it just worked. But it was a good conference. Again, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much to iX and the MeetBSD planning folks who put all that on. I know a lot of folks did a lot of work. Yes, Denise and Annie and others did a ton of work to make that all happen. So definitely very much appreciated their efforts this year. It was good, and wish them luck for 2 years from now. Let them have a little rest first. But I don't know how they're going to top it, though. What is the venue going to be next time? I mean, we've already done Berkeley.
What about Matto's idea?
Matt keeps throwing out we should do it in Hawaii one of these years. Matt, if you can make that happen, let's do Hawaii next time. Maybe that'll top Berkeley. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, a good time was had by all. All right, well, we should get into the news now. So let's hop over here first. So we got headlines. We have building FreeBSD 11.0 release OpenStack images with BSD Cloud in it. So you did the notes for this one, Alan. What are they doing here? I mean, aside
so this is basically a detailed tutorial that shows you how to create a customized cloud image using the FreeBSD install media. So basically how to build an image that you can send up to any of the many cloud providers that use OpenStack. Although with a couple of tweaks, this will probably work for any other cloud provider that uses something like KVM or Zen or whatever as well. But he says, we're going to prepare a FreeBSD image for OpenStack deployment. We do this by creating a FreeBSD 11 instance, installing it and converting it using BSD Cloud init. We'll use the Cloud VPS public OpenStack Cloud as the example for this. Creating an account there and install the OpenStack command line tools like Nova, Cinder, and Glance. So a FreeBSD image with cloud in it will automatically resize its disk to the size of the flavor that you define. So you make a small image, and then when you deploy it on a VM, whatever size disk you give it, it'll resize the disk to that size. And it will add your SSH keys when it first boots up via the cloud config stuff. And you can also provide other cloud config stuff to execute a shell script at first boot. For example, to bootstrap and install, Puppet or Ansible or whatever you're going to use to do the rest.
Sure.
If you use Ansible to manage OpenStack instances, you can integrate it without manually logging in and doing anything manually. So that, as soon as it comes up, it does all the stuff for you. Since FreeBSD 10.2, there's an RC script which, if the file /first boot exists, expands the root file system to the full size of the disk. While BSD Cloud Init does this as well, if you don't need the whole Cloud Init stack, you're just going to put in a static SSH key, for example, because these aren't images you're giving to other people; they're just for you or whatever. You can just touch that file, and the disk will do the stuff it needs to do as soon as it boots up the first time.
Funny story about that. I was looking for that /first boot file a while back, like for the Pico images. That wasn't documented very well anywhere that I could find because my Google foo failed me, and I'm all looking at like rc.conf knobs, and I'm like, okay, first boot init in here, and I finally just had to go through and read the source code and go, oh, okay.
So I think the documentation for this one is a blog post by Colin from like 3 years ago. Gotta fix
That's what I think it was. And like I said, my Google foo failed me in this case. So we need to put that in a handbook somewhere or something. But it was very helpful to have that because being able to resize on first boot for the Raspberry Pi images we were doing is also very helpful.
Yeah, and with the Raspberry Pi image, you don't need the whole cloud init thing because it's not for the cloud. It's just a Raspberry Pi.
I just need to use the whole SD card. If I have a 16 gig SD card, it would be nice to have the whole 16 gigs. That's all I want.
But there's also the option of using the FreeBSD release tools to build custom cloud images like this, because the FreeBSD release team already builds a bunch of images like this, including for Amazon, Google Compute Engine, regular VMDKs and QCOWs, and so on. It'd be really interesting for somebody to make a tutorial out of those, where you can actually custom build, say, a stable image rather than the release, so that you could even maybe just the reling branch, so that when you build your new cloud image, it already has 11.0-P4 built into it, and stuff like that.
Sure. Well, hopefully somebody does make a tutorial out of that. Come on, we can't read them all for you folks. There's a lot of you out there. I know. You spend a little spare cycles on this and send it in. And I know everyone in the community
all it takes is somebody who actually needs to build that image to just write down the steps when they do it. And they'll be glad they did when a year from now, when the next version comes out and they need to redo it, that they wrote the notes down. And if you're going to write the notes down, you might as well share them with everybody.
That's right. Okay. Well, let's move on here. So the next thing I'll talk about this one was iXsystems officially announces TrueOS. So, as loyal listeners in this show, you've no doubt heard by now that we're undergoing a name shift and moving PCBSD to TrueOS. You've heard me hint about it and talk about it, etc. But last week during MeetBSD, we kind of made this official with IX issuing a press release, and I was able to give a talk detailing many of the reasons and the things going on with all of the changes involved. The talk should be available online here soonish. Again, I was told probably mine will be one of the first ones that goes up. Yeah, maybe a little biased or whatever, which is fine. Yep, go ahead and put it up soon. But I will give you a quick recap for those who were not able to make it to MeetBSD. So first of all, TrueOS, formerly PCBSD, is moving to a rolling release model based on FreeBSD current. So that means if you do a uname right now, it's going to say 12 current. At some point down the road, it'll say 13 current and so forth and so on, right? We're just going to track current. Lumina has become the default desktop for TrueOS. Couple reasons for that. It's homegrown. It means we don't have to spend time porting things from Linux and trying to keep existing functionality working. All we can do is just kind of work on new features and stuff. When you have limited development hours, the less you can spend porting and the more time actually adding new cool stuff is better. So that's the default. Not to say if you're a KDE lover, you can't still use your KDE. We have the whole package repo. So if you want to package install foo, you can run foo. I don't really care. Up to you. LibreSSL, of course, enabled top to bottom. So base system has LibreSSL and the ports all use that. So that was a change. We're also in the middle of working on a conversion to OpenRC for a run control replacement. So the reasoning behind that is, A, it's BSD license, so 2-clause BSD. So that's good. We like that. And B, we're looking for a solution that gets us just a really fast boot times, especially on laptops. We did some benchmarking here. So my personal little X1 Carbon NVMe drive, the existing system, takes anywhere from a minute to a minute and 20 seconds to boot because it has to do the wireless association, DH client, get a default route. I mean, OpenNTPD takes a while to start up. Like, there's just all these things that add a few seconds here or there, and it adds up to about a minute and 20 usually is pretty typical. So when we switch to OpenRC, I've now gotten that down to about 18 seconds, which is a huge improvement in my mind, because now it makes a lot of laptops that don't have suspend resume not suck so bad to actually use and flip on really quick to do something and turn it back off. So anyway, more on that later. We're getting ready to push out some packages here probably next week for testing for people to try this out, because we'll need to get feedback from people. A lot of stuff changed. We're having to rewrite a bunch of service files, etc. And it's a big deal. But on the other hand, we're really feeling good about where this is going to take us long term. I think there's a lot of neat stuff. Who knows, Alan? Maybe we'll be putting pressure to push this into FreeBSD at some point. If we can prove it, I would rather we bleed on it first and really prove it works well. And once we've kind of, sanded all the rough edges off, fixed things and whatnot, and then all of a sudden now it's like, oh, okay, maybe this should be considered. But let us bleed on it for a while, and we'll be happy to have you folks take a look. Okay, so next up was we announced the TrueOS Pico as well, which is our thin client solution. So essentially it allows you to run a TrueOS server, and then you can pair that with a device like a Raspberry Pi 2. So the Raspberry Pi 2 boots up, it does some zero config stuff with MDNS, talks to a REST server, creates a login. Essentially it'll boot you up to a graphical login, just like you're on a real system, except everything's, of course, running over the network. On your main server, we have stuff like virtual GL working, sound forwarding working, all that. So that's kind of our new, I'm calling it like a tech preview release. It's not quite to beta yet because there's some new features I want to add, but it is pretty functional for being able to bring up a desktop and browse the net and do email and that type of thing. But my goal is to get like working full screen 3D video, and playing Minecraft full screen for my kids would be awesome, right? On a little Pi, it's up there using a shared GPU on the host. So anyway, good stuff. So a lot of stuff's happening with TrueOS. We'll have a lot more to talk about in the next couple months. But the OpenRC stuff, like I said, give us about a week and we'll start pushing out some testing packages for folks to play with. And we'll definitely welcome feedback, because we're just seeing a huge improvement in boot times, which just makes it so much better. So definitely liking it. Okay. Well, anything you want to add to that, Alan? Did I forget anything from my talk?
I didn't sit to see your talk.
Oh, you weren't even there. Okay. Well, I think that was my 45-minute talk condensed into 2 minutes. So not bad. I think I did a pretty good job of that.
I was mostly prepping for mine.
Right. Isn't that what happens?
Right
but anyway. Yeah, somebody was complaining about a 90-second boot, and I'm like, in the chat here, and I'm like, yeah, I agree. That's been annoying me for years now. So the fact that we finally found something that will work to help us get over that is
I guess fantastic. Maybe part of it is my expectations aren't that high, I guess. But I've never found it that bad. Although partly waiting for the Wi-Fi, that when it says waiting 30 seconds, it's that one just pisses me off. But that one could be fixed. It does. And also same thing, like I had just kind of grown to expect it, like, oh, it's going to take at least a minute to boot approximately, right? And it's just typical, even on modern i7 with NVMe. And now that we've actually put something alternative in, I'm like, wow, I'm actually to a desktop in, a third or fourth or a fifth of the time. All of a sudden now it's like when I go back to the old one, I'm messing around. I'm like, I don't know how I put up with this before. But anyway, I reboot once a month. That's true. Well, so I'm one of those guys where I shut my laptop down. Oh, yes. Laptop.
Right? So I'll turn it on.
My laptop actually suspends resumes, but I usually do shut it down if I'm putting it in my backpack. Because one time it woke up in my backpack and got very, very, very hot. That was on an airplane. Make some of your hardware cranky. Yeah. That was not fun.
But anyway, it's good stuff. So again, keep an eye out for it in the next week or so. We'll love to get some feedback. Of course, we're going to need people to help report bugs when they find issues, and we're still porting over service files and whatnot. So there's a lot of things to get done, and we'll look forward to sharing that with everyone here very soon. Okay, so before we go to the next story here, it's time for our first sponsor this week. So, of course, isn't this fitting? We're going to talk about iXsystems, which, if you've been around a while, you know about iXsystems. But did you know they're the ones who put on the MeetBSD conference? And not only that, they did a fantastic job of it this year. Just one small way that the iX family can give back to the BSD community as a whole, which was fantastic. And, of course, we thank everyone who was involved with that this last year. But
and they also,
in addition to that,
power the development of TrueOS.
That's right. They power the development of TrueOS, FreeNAS, TrueNAS, etc. I mean, there's a lot of, they have their fingers in a lot of open source pies and like to help out the communities in a different way. But definitely a good company. And of course, one of the things they do is they build systems. So we're talking everything from little FreeNAS minis all the way up to powerhouse TrueNAS boxes with a 60 drive array JBODs and whatnot. I mean, they can kind of do everything in between as well. So if you're into storage in a big way, they can do that in a big way. If you need something small for a small office, home, they can do that as well. You need servers, you need compute. Heck, I mean, they like custom stuff. So you call them up, and the cool thing about iX is you tell them what you want to do. So this is what I'm going to run. This is my story. This is the problem we're trying to solve, and let them help design a solution for you. You know, they're going to know what works best in what situation. So don't be scared to get technical with them. Tell them what kind of database you're running. You know, what size records do you have? Are you doing storage? Do you have a lot of files? Do you have a small amount of files? Are they big files, small files? Like, how can we optimize this? You know, what's your workflow? So anyway, get in touch with them today. And of course, they'll hook you up the latest and greatest Intel processors as well. Pretty much anything you need in that box, they'll try and work with you to the best of their ability and get you taken care of. Now, let's see. You don't have any new pictures to show us yet, Alan. You haven't ordered anything recently?
Sadly, the machines that I ordered have installed in the data center already.
Right. Oh well.
Pictures.
Oh,
I'm really bad at that. But the point is that I needed the new servers quickly. They got them to me quickly, and I got I didn't have to do anything. They just shoved them in the rack, and they worked.
They just show up and work. I suppose that's what you want to hear.
Well,
right?
especially
you don't want to actually have to go see
the
it.
current set that's in the pipeline with them is all 4 of them are being shipped to 4 different data centers in the U.S., a country which I'm not in currently. And I'm never even going to see these machines. I don't even. Sure. I know what they look like because I have 2 identical ones here. But, iX is taking care of installing the OS exactly the way I want, setting it up, configuring everything, so that when it gets to the data center, they plug in the power and they plug in the Ethernet, and it works. It's ready to go. You're not going to get that anywhere else, where they're actually going to go through setting up individual IP addresses and stuff for you. Or in this case, making sure that the video cards work and everything.
That is true. So anyway, good stuff. Get in touch with them today. Of course, the website, iXsystems.com/BSDNow. Get in touch with them. Tell them you heard about it here. They love hearing from our listeners. Okay, so the next story, Alan, we have running FreeBSD 11 on a Raspberry Pi. So tell us a little about what they got going on here.
Yeah, so this one's mostly talking about what you will notice that's different when you start running 11 on your Raspberry Pi. So if you might have been maybe running 10.3 or something on your Raspberry Pi. Actually, did they have 10.3 for the Pi? I don't remember. Anyway.
Well, the Pi 1 for sure.
Raspberry Pi Model B, so that's a Pi 1. So anyway, it's mostly talking about some of the changes. First of all, the serial console didn't really change. One of the nice things with the I think it was 10.2 and later is that the console's on by default. But
sure.
And then they talk about some of the other changes, and specifically the changes to Wi-Fi. There have been quite a few changes to Wi-Fi in 11. In particular,
that stumps some people the first time.
If config, you won't see your actual Wi-Fi device, like the URTWN or whatever. You only see the WLAN interface, and if it hasn't been set up yet, then you won't see that either.
Sure.
So in this example, he was actually trying to find the WLAN interfaces by looking at the kernel modules in the D message. But pro tip, if you run sysctl net.wlan.devices, it'll give you a list, and then you can easily set them up. But it shows examples of how to do that, specifically with the rc.conf to create the WLAN interface automatically and set it up with DHCP, and how to configure the WPA supplicant so that you can have it connect to your Wi-Fi right away. So it's got all that, and then shows how you can actually see the interfaces, and then he's got it working and pinging. One of the big changes, though, is with FreeBSD 11, official ARM packages. So you can just package install
That's
stuff.
such a lifesaver.
And you don't have to go use, some random person's repo that's only been updated once,
And a blue moon, right? It doesn't.
It only contains the packages they wanted, and so it's mostly working, but then it's missing the one thing you want or whatever. So not every single package is available, but I think it's like 20,000 of the 27,000.
There's a really good subset of packages. So you have very good odds of
There's a couple things
that
are missing because they just don't work under ARM or require something that doesn't. But in general, most of the stuff is there. That makes a big difference. Also, the GPIO stuff has been really solidified. So any LEDs or anything like that are built into the Pi, or in my case, the Omega, or a bunch of other different devices, there's just a device under /dev/LED. So the OK light on the Raspberry Pi is /dev/LED/OK. And if you echo 0 to it, it turns off. And if you echo 1 to it, it turns on. Or you can use the userland utility Morse to send Morse code strings to it to make it blink at, you can just make it like blink at a certain speed, or you can actually make it blink Morse code at people, or whatever you want to do. And then separately, there's GPIO CTL, which makes it very easy to just say, hey, pin 25 is an output pin, and I'm going to set it to 0 or 1. Or, this one's an input pin, and I'm going to read the value from it. I did play with this a bit because I had hooked up like an LED to one of them, and then like a power switch, a reset type button to the other one, and I could actually tell when the button was pressed and when it wasn't. Making it very useful to build something like that. Then it talks a bit about the I2C stuff and how to get that working, and even how to modify the flattened device tree to set up a real-time clock. I didn't know that there actually was one built into this, but yeah, it looks like the Broadcom 2835 actually does have one, and you just add this little bit of code and compile the flattened device tree, and suddenly your Raspberry Pi will have a real-time clock.
Nice.
I'm not sure why that's not the default or whatever, but that looks interesting. And then there's also an example in here, like, because you have to build a custom kernel to get it, I guess is why. And a bunch of other interesting things. And you can see now that
we adjust the CPU speed as well.
Yep. The other thing is that you can, the same way you adjust the CPU speed on your regular like Intel x86 machine, you can actually do that on the Raspberry Pi now, scaling it between 700 and 300 megahertz and 100 megahertz increments, which can be important.
Yeah, it was annoying. The twos started at 600 megahertz by default, so we'd have to bump those to 900, the full clock speed.
Yeah, and allows you to maybe clock it down to avoid it getting too hot, depending what you're doing. Or, if you're running it off a battery, maybe you can save a little bit more power.
Sure.
And it also has an example of using the one-wire bus. So again, modifying the flattened device tree and adding this one-wire device, which allows, in this case, he connected a temperature probe. And so he can actually measure temperature with it. That information is quite useful to me because that's one of the things I wanted to do with my little Onion Omega. It's actually MIPS, not ARM, but it'll basically be the same concept, is build...
server room
temperature monitor. Not quite to the getting to the point of using a relay to turn the air conditioner on and off, but maybe someday.
I wimped out and just bought a little device for that does like humidity and temperature and sends me texts and emails and stuff because I'm lazy.
Yeah, I might do that because one of the other things I want to maybe do with the Onion Omega is actually make a little poor man's IPMI thing for my tower that I have in the basement. That's my personal file server. It's one of the only things I have left that's not super micro. Even my desktop that I'm sitting at right now is super micro now. So it doesn't, I guess this doesn't have IPMI either, but my file server doesn't, and every once in a while I need to be able to reboot it when I'm, say, at a conference. So being able to just SSH into this little MIPS device and say, hey, GPIO CTL, toggle this reset button on that I've wired up into this little MIPS device would be great.
That's cool. Well, definitely check it out, folks. There's a lot of neat stuff you can do on the Pi with BSD these days. I know at some point we'll have to have Mr. Petzel back on and talk to him. He was telling me about his 100-watt LED Raspberry Pi combo he has, which basically turns the darkness in his front yard into a blazing sun in the middle of winter up in Wisconsin. So
That does sound
that's
interesting.
an interesting story. I hadn't heard that before until I was out there this last weekend. But anyway, we'll have to chat about that later. We'll leave you teased for next time he comes on the show. Okay, so moving on here. So we, of course, AdBlock's been in the news a bit recently. Some of the more popular browser plugins are now accepting bribes, contributions to permit specific ads to get through the filter. Well, today the ad blockers strike back. So we have a great tutorial up on GitHub, which demonstrates one of the useful features using Unbound and FreeBSD to do your own ad blocking using void zones specifically. So void zones are, of course, a way to return NX domain when a DNS requests are made to a known malicious or spam or advertising site. So, of course, using the void zones tools, which if you go check out the repo we have here, will make managing this easier. You're able to pull in lists of known sites to block from several third-party curators. So you don't have to go and put that list together yourself, which is kind of nice. Or maybe you could use it for other controls, like for your home or office, but blocking other specific sites. No more Facebook for you kids, sorry. Anyway, when coupled with our past tutorials on setting up your own FreeBSD router, this actually may be a lot more useful for folks who want to do ad blocking at a much lower level. So, for example, you can now filter smartphones or other devices attached to your network. So definitely check it out. This is neat. This has got me excited. I need to go home and set this up on my box because I had noticed the same thing with my old ad blocker. It was starting to let more and more through. So this looks very appealing and intriguing. So congrats to the folks for setting that up. And hopefully, I don't know if it's in ports yet. I did not take a look. I don't know if you looked, Alan. But it might be nice to see if that lands in ports here soon. And you can just package install it and go. But anyway, the config actually looks pretty simple for those who have not used Unbound before. The configuration is actually pretty easy, so you could do a lot of this by hand if you'd like. But it really simplifies it by bringing in a whole bunch of stuff in user local etc void zones, a lot of text files that list which domains to block. And then, of course, you can edit it. One thing you can do is if you're running, say, a FreeBSD, PCBSD, or TrueOS box, and you don't necessarily have a router that you can control this way, you can do this on your local box as well. So you can set your local DNS to Unbound, so point it at 127.0.0.1, and then set up your Unbound config
to point
and do all your own
the router
DNS.
you don't control, or to whatever other DNS provider you like, whether it's Google, Hurricane Electric, or OpenDNS, and then be able to block stuff.
I use a combination of this for my laptop as well. So we have a VPN for iXoffice, and unfortunately the DNS is all in San Jose on a not very fast network. So it's like I use Unbound locally and then send certain things to the IX DNS and other things to Google and so forth and so on. So definitely some neat stuff you can do here. Highly encourage you to check it out if you're interested in any of these kind of DNS trickery. Okay, time for the news roundup, folks. So first up, we have looks like a new BSD socket API revamp. There's a draft RFC going around. So tell us about who wrote this and what they're trying to do here, Alan.
Martin Sistrick has created this new draft RFC to basically replace the old-fashioned BSD sockets API, which is basically how every Unix C program or every C program connects to the internet or the network at all. It's got a couple of problems. If you go back to, EuroBSDCon 2013 in Malta, Paul Hennekamp gave a great talk about some of the shortcomings of the API. But he didn't really have a proposed solution, and Martin here does. He says, the progress in the area of network protocols is distinctively lagging behind. While every hobbyist new to the art of programming writes and publishes their small JavaScript libraries, there's no such thing going on with network protocols. Indeed, it looks like the field of network protocols is dominated by big companies and academia, just like programming as a whole used to be before the advent of personal computers. He says the API proposed in this document doesn't try to virtualize all possible aspects of all possible protocols and provide a single set of functions to deal with them all. Instead, it acknowledges how varied protocol landscapes is and how much the requirements for individual protocols differ. Therefore, it lets each protocol define its own API and asks only for bare minimum of standardization of behavior needed to implement the protocols in a composable way. As a consequence, the new API is much more lightweight and flexible than the BSD sockets API. And it allows to decompose today's monolithic protocol monsters into small, simple-purpose microprotocols that can be easily combined together to achieve the desired functionality. So, if you just kind of browse through this thing, there's quite a few interesting concepts, but it's like the current way we do it is we have, Ethernet, and then on top of that we have IP, and then on top of that we have TCP, and then on top of that we have HTTP. At least conceptually, that's what's happening. Although in the sockets API, TCP and IP are really kind of combined together. You don't make an IP connection and then make a TCP connection. And then, as far as the BSD sockets API goes, HTTP doesn't really enter into it. Whereas what we actually see is, we have TCP, and then inside that, there's basically a header, a body, and a footer for whatever protocol is on top. Maybe in HTTP, there's no footer other than the end of file signal or whatever. But in HTTP 2, I think there is one. But anyway, the point is, it's all the same thing of just the way I used to teach TCP IP is just envelopes inside envelopes, right? You have your Ethernet packet, which is addressed to a certain MAC address and has the trailer or whatever. And then inside of that, you have your IP packet, which has an IP address. And inside of that, you have your TCP packet, which has the port number. And inside that, you have your HTML request asking for a certain page on the web server or whatever. And and routers go through and like open up the Ethernet thing and then put that whole stack of TCP or IP and above envelopes back in a different Ethernet packet and send it along. But anyway, so the concept here is...
Do you know if anyone's actually started implementing something like this yet? Or is it
if there's actually any kind of implementation for this yet. But the idea here is that, each protocol has an initialization, it's kind of middle thing, and then some termination stuff. But what you actually get is this concept, like you create a TCP connection, right? So you say, socket 1 is TCP connect to an IP address and a port.
Sure.
I don't know if it's a great idea for the API there to just be a text string that gets processed rather than, passing it a struct or something. But
Sure.
I can see advantages to that, but I don't see how programmatically that might be slightly harder to work with. Strings in C are fun. But anyway.
Well, a little bit of a pain.
And then you then pass that socket and some arguments, and that creates your foo protocol. And then you pass that socket, and in this case, it doesn't need any arguments, and that creates your bar protocol. And then you pass the bar socket with some extra arguments into the BAS protocol, and now you have your whole protocol stack. And then you can start, you can close each of those in order, or you can just, if you do the full H close on it, it will close all of them. But in general, the concept here is that you can, have HTTP defined as a protocol that can sit on top of TCP, and then you can define your protocol on top of that. And so, the HTTP stuff happens, but then it takes the body of the HTTP request and passes that to your protocol, which, maybe something over TCP or whatever you're trying to do. Or the other nice one they have here is an example of using WebSockets and compression. So they create their TCP socket, and then they create a new WebSocket using that TCP socket they just created. And then they define a compression algorithm, and they open up the WebSocket and get so many bytes and figure out what compression algorithm it is. And then they call the compress start function. And basically now when they receive data over the socket, it's all going to be passed through this compression algorithm function, which will decompress it and give you back the original bytes. In general, this seems like a much nicer way to be able to compose an application and kind of separate the different bits.
Yeah. This definitely looks a lot easier than current implementation. So I'm curious to see. And also, they mentioned it's BSD socket API. I'm wondering if they have specific BSDs they're targeting.
Well,
with this,
no.
or is this just a generic?
So that dates back to like 4.3 BSD,
days.
when BSD invented the concept of sockets as a way to talk to the network. So it's just revamping that thing because everybody still uses the BSD socket API from the 80s.
Sure. So I'm just wondering what like the first reference platform might be. If it'll end up showing up on a Linux first, or if we'll end up seeing it on a come back to your roots. Let's see it on a BSD first.
So, I think this still needs a bit more polish, and that some of the concepts might be a little out there, but I definitely think that it can be. This could be the right thing with a bit more work on it and getting more people involved.
Sure.
Yeah, especially with combined with some of the lessons we've learned with, like, say, the DNS. We're using like get DNS or something into this, and then he's got your presentation protocols like support for JSON, so that instead of needing a separate thing, you could just easily, after you receive the data, you just feed it through your JSON function, and you get your data out the other side, and then you can pass it to some other function and allow you to kind of use that as a presentation format for anything. And it, the other obvious presentation format is like SSL. But yeah.
Okay. Well, cool. Well, thanks, Al. That's some good stuff there, and we wish them luck getting that approved, and hopefully we'll see an implementation at some point down the road. So next up, Cephi over at the Dragonfly project has issued a call for testing. It looks like there's a newer version of the RE driver.
It's the Realtek Ethernet driver.
That's right. So Realtek NICs, but specifically he adds this comment here. He says, I've made an updated version of RE4, which leverages Realtek drivers chip PHY reset and initialization code. He's saying, I hope it can resolve all kinds of weirdness we've encountered in this chip so far. So, of course, that pretty much is your call to testing. You know what to do. So give this a whirl if you're a Dragonfly user or fan. Let them know if you're in any new issues. Or better yet, maybe give them some feedback if it fixes some long-standing problems you've run into in the past. It's nice to know it's actually doing what it claims and not just not giving us regressions or whatever.
But the Realtek NIC has been known for a while to be one of the less desirable network cards to have. But it's quite popular in like, especially for like the built-in NIC in a lot of machines. Because it's so cheap, sometimes you
don't have a choice. That's just what you got. So it'd be nice
if this driver can solve some of those issues, we need to get him to port that over to FreeBSD, because Cephi is actually also a FreeBSD committer for his day job.
Right. Yeah, we need to bring this over. But anyway, do some testing, folks. Let them know. Get them the feedback so they can fix it, and then we'll put some pressure on them. Get that ported over. We need to get that done. Okay, so it's time for our second sponsor this week, which we're going to be going over to DigitalOcean now. Of course, the website for that, DigitalOcean.com. Little thing you got to remember, though, when you make your new account there's going to be a section where you can enter a coupon code. You'll want to enter FreeBSD Now. So that's all one word, not BSD Now, FreeBSD Now. And a little history behind that, because I think the time they came on board as a sponsor was right when they started doing FreeBSD droplets for the first time.
10.1 was the first one they had?
Yeah, 10.1 maybe. 10.1 I think. But anyway, they've been doing them for a while now. Now they have 11.0, they got ZFS. But anyway, that coupon code, that gives you your $10 credit, which is good for running one of their lowest VMs for 2 months. Or if you want to do, starting up VMs and pay by the, by the hour again?
You pay by the hour. You always pay by the hour, but they round down to a fixed monthly price if you leave it running the whole month.
That's right. So you could even use it towards that. But either way, that's enough money to let you start playing around with a FreeBSD box somewhere up in the cloud. Of course, everything in DigitalOcean's backed by SSDs, so it's going to be nice and fast when talking to the disk. If you want to spin up a little heavier VM with more memory, though, they can now do ZFS as well.
And they have especially high memory optimized VMs you can get. So if you need more RAM, but not necessarily more CPU and more space, they have some different packages now where, before for that price you would only get, 16 gigs of RAM. You can now get 32 for less money, but you get less CPU with it. But it allows you to pick,
that's right,
if you just need more memory or if you want both. With the typical packages, they scale both up as every time it gets more expensive, you get more CPU and more RAM. Sometimes you just need more RAM, and that allows you to save a bit of money there. The feature I've been playing with lately is the floating IP addresses, though. When you're creating and destroying VMs all the time, each time they get new IP addresses. But sometimes you need, a static IP address that's going to always point to your current VM, even though you're blowing it away all the time. Or it's the one your website points to, and you can bounce it between a primary and a backup VM. Or, so when you do upgrades, you can flop it around. And so that's what I've been playing with. And they basically don't cost anything while you're using them. But if you keep the IP address and it's not pointing at an active VM, there's a small fee to avoid people, wasting IP addresses.
Stealing it back, yeah.
It's not expensive and it's very helpful to be able to have an IP address you can move around between VMs. For
sure. So check it out today, folks. Of course, data centers all over the world. So you have your pick to choose from. You can find one that's close to you, has the best ping, or maybe you want something on the other side of the world because you're trying to do some redundancy or bring something else in a part of a world where you don't have a data center. So definitely good stuff. Get in touch with them today. If you talk to anyone over there, tell them you heard about it here on BSDNow. Okay, so next up we have a trio of hackathon reports from OpenBSD's B2K16, which was recently held in Budapest. So definitely these guys do some really neat ones, nice locations too. But first up we have Jeremy Evans gives us a rundown, which starts with sweeping some of the cruft out of the barn, so to speak. So he says here, I started off B2K16 by channeling TEDU and removing a lot of ports, including Lang Ruby 2.0, Lang IO, converters Ruby JSON, databases, DBI, C++, Ruby Swift, blah, 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 Ruby Prolifigy, and so forth and so on. So a lot of them got yanked out. But after that, he talks about some of the improvements that have been made to other ports, such as Postgres, Nginx, and Ruby ports, specifically fixing things such as a Postgres upgrade support, which wasn't working properly on OpenBSD, and then breaking Nginx down into a series of sub-packages, which sounds pretty cool. And then a major Ruby update, which touched about 50% of the Ruby packages as well. So quite a forklift upgrade there. Next up, we have a Landry, how do I say that last name? Briel? I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, Landry. But it tells us about his trip, which also started with some major port pruning, which included getting rid of a bunch of stale XFCE bits, and it looks like Drupal 6 has gone bye-bye as well. But one of the quotes from his report here is about the Tor browser. He says, finally found some time again to review properly the pending port for Tor browser. Even if I don't like the way it is developed, which he says it's 600 plus patches against upstream Firefox ESR. Wow. Even if the relationship is improving, he says, nor will I endorse its use. I feel that the time that was spent on porting it and updating it and maintaining it shouldn't be lost. It should get committed. There are only some ports-wise minor tweaks to fix. Had a bit of discussions about that with the other porters. So sounds like that's going to get put in. And wow, that's quite a patch set, though. Yuck. Yeah. I hate to be the one maintaining that. But
interesting at the top there, he's got his travel reviews of like the hotel and the food and so on.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in travel stuff, check that out too.
Yeah, for sure. If you're going to be in Budapest anytime soon, he's got recommendations for you. But lastly, we have Anton Jacot gives us a smaller update on his work, and I'll read you the pull quote here. He says, first task of this hackathon was for Jasper and I to upgrade to GNOME 3.22.1. He said version 3.22.2 is actually at the port tree since. He said, as usual, I had already updated the core libraries a few days before so we could get started with a nice set of fully updated packages. And it ended up being the fastest GNOME update ever. It all went very smoothly. We're still debating the future of GNOME on OpenBSD, though. He said more and more features require systemd interfaces, and without a replacement, it may not make sense to keep it around. Implementing these interfaces requires time, which Jasper and I really don't have these days. Anyway, we'll see. All in all, a good trip. Sounds like they got some much-needed hacking taking place, and it's good to see the cruft getting cleaned up, along with some new ports landing. I got a comment on the GNOME thing, though. I hear him on that. Again, that's why we ended up having to just switch to Lumina for TrueOS. It's like even KDE. I mean, I feel bad because we have all these different either a person or some small groups of people who port things like KDE or GNOME over to FreeBSD. And it seems like they're just spending more and more time spinning their wheels. Every time a new update comes out, oh, what did they break this time? Oh, they added more dependencies on systemd or something that's not BSD or very Linux specific. And you end up spending weeks. I mean, who knows how many hundreds or thousands of hours of developers' time are being spent just to keep existing functionality working because they've changed their back-end dependencies. And for us, we're a small team for TrueOS. We didn't have time to keep chasing that. We did KDE originally. We tried doing everything, being agnostic. But with Lumina, it's developed here. We're never going to have to worry about it growing a systemd dependency, which is going to screw us over for a month while we fix that. Yeah. We can actually work on adding features like ZFS support to the file manager, right? Mm-hmm. Or Ken's added support for BSD's actual wireless devices, so it understands that. Or the display management, for example, is BSD specific. So I have much empathy for the guys on OpenBSD. I don't know what you guys will switch to. Maybe you want to bring Lumina over, because at least that's got to be a smaller diff to get ported over from FreeBSD to Open. But more power to you guys who can keep doing that.
We know the GNOME team has their automatic like Jenkins build system running one FreeBSD to make sure that they don't stop it from compiling. But when they're developing these features, they don't seem to care enough.
They just only have one ecosystem they're really concerned about, is what it boils down to.
Which is interesting because, all of these projects really started about, part of the push was to support as many different... I remember when apps were like, oh yeah, we support like Solaris and SunOS and HPUX and then all these other ones. And I know a lot of those have died off or are really not worth it, but I don't know. It seems like
it's
this hyper-focus...
Portability is not high.
The hyper-focus is not good.
Yeah. So anyway, again, I just got to give props to the people who keep those things running, because I've been there in the trenches, and that's a lot of work. So, good luck with that, everyone. Okay, so you want to tell us about the new status reports that just landed for FreeBSD?
Yes, it's been another quarter already, and so we now have the end of Q3 here, and we have basically the status report on everything that happened between July and September in FreeBSD, which basically is 11.0 release. Wasn't quite finalized until slightly after this report, but it was, most of the stuff is covered in it. So it starts out with the team reports, where we get a first report from the FreeBSD release engineering team talking about their work to get 11.0 out. And, despite the last minute issues, they got it going. Then the ports team talks about their various things that they've been working on. And in the quarter, they currently have 26,300 ports and 2,150 open PRs, 516 of which are unassigned, meaning they need someone to help work on. But they also had 5,295 commits by 117 active committers. So obviously a lot of people doing a lot of work on that one. This is a slight increase in the number of PRs and number of unassigned PRs, but a slight decrease in the number of committers. So everybody's busy, but they also brought in some new committers to start helping with that. So they've been working on that. They've also infrastructure stuff, converting more things over to the uses framework, including KDE, Linux, Java VM, and some more. Lots of other stuff they've been working on, updating Firefox extended service release, Chromium, GCC package, etc. Behind the scenes, they also ran 24 exp runs, which basically are when there's going to be a change to the port tree or the base system. They do a run where they try to compile every port and see what breaks that normally doesn't break, so that we can make sure that the change that somebody's proposing doesn't, break a whole bunch of ports.
Hork the rest of the tree.
I've
done that.
And the FreeBSD Foundation sponsored some additional build machines so that more of these releases can be built. And, importantly, we needed enough stuff so that, say, we could build packages for ARM64, which means requiring more machines and so on. Then, obviously, during this quarter, the 9th core team also took office with 4 existing members, Baptiste Drusson, Ed Mast, George Neville-Neal, and Hiroki Sato were from the previous core team and were re-elected. And then John Baldwin, who has been on the core team previously but wasn't recently, rejoined core. And then 4 new members being actually myself, Chris Moore, Benedict Reuschling, and Benno Rice. I say the new core team represents about the ideal balance between experience and fresh blood.
Sure.
Beyond handling the ongoing business of reviewing the core team's agenda and dealing with that, also responded to requests from Craig Rodriguez about how the hardware supplied by the FreeBSD Foundation is used by the project. And you can read more about that in the report. We also approved the importing of Concurrency Kit, which is a set of library type functions for dealing with concurrency and locking primitives and stuff. Basically alternative implementations of things like RCU. There's also a proposal to create a shadow GPL-v3 toolchain repository. So basically a separate repository where we would have the updated GCC stuff in order to support platforms like MIPS that don't build with Clang currently. Although it was actually, as that all got spun up, it was kind of obviated by Baptiste's work on an external toolchain that allowed you to just build it from ports and not have to have the separate tree.
Sure. Yeah, I think ultimately that'll be the better solution long term.
And then there was also the fact that OpenSSH deprecated DSA keys a while ago, although FreeBSD kept DSA keys enabled in the 10.x series so that it wouldn't be an unexpected change when you upgrade from, say, 10.2 to 10.3, and suddenly your SSH key doesn't work. But with 11, it came time to synchronize with upstream again, and so starting with 11, DSA keys don't work. So the core team had to help manage removing DSA keys from all the FreeBSD cluster stuff, and this necessitated a lot of people getting new keys for the free fall and other stuff so they could continue to commit and access project resources. And so Core would like to give a special thanks to David Wolfskill for dealing with the giant surge in key change requests until Peter Wem could get around to actually writing an automated service for it. But he did a very good job of dealing with the huge number of requests that came in once people's keys stopped working.
Yeah, a few people were like surprised.
Well, we gave some heads up, and a bunch of people changed their keys, and then you wait a little bit, and you see the number of key changes dying off, and so you disable the support for the old keys, and suddenly a whole new list of people are coming in. Then there's an update from the FreeBSD Foundation, and then lots of other updates from the whole project. Some of the highlights here: there's a Capsicum update, which covers a surge of work by a bunch of people, including, Conrad Meyer, Baptiste Dresson, Ed Mast, Marius Zaborski, and myself, to capsicumize a bunch of basic utilities in the base system. Some of them are relatively simple, but we're targeting applications used in security-sensitive tools like FreeBSD Update and Portsnap. I capsicumized BSPatch. There was also capsicumization of CMP, which is for comparing files. ident, which is used to get the the SVN revision string out of a file. T and TR, which obviously are for splitting a pipe and for translating, but those are used in tools and like Portsnap, and so LAM and a couple other things were all capsicumized. So there was that work. There's also a status report item about the graphics stack update. So, if you're interested in having your Skylake graphics or whatever, you should check that out. There's one about LLD, which is LLVM's linker, and using that to link the FreeBSD base system and kernel. There's one about the VirtualBox shared folders file system. So if you want to copy files back and forth inside of a VirtualBox from your base system, that's definitely of interest. EVDev support, which is better support for mice and keyboards, but touchscreens and multi-touch screens, which is something people are getting into. And then there's the ZFS code sync with the latest OpenZFS Illumos, which brought quite a few interesting things in the last quarter here, including the compressed ARC. So when you're reading files off disk and they go into the ARC, which is the adaptive replacement cache, if they are compressed on disk, they remain compressed in the ARC. Meaning, if the data on your disk has a compression ratio of 2:1, it not only takes half as much RAM in the cache, meaning you can cache twice as much stuff.
That's
makes a
free
big
cache
difference,
basically.
The L2 ARC now stores the same compressed data as the ARC. Before, the L2 ARC compressed it itself. It actually meant that if you read compressed data off disk, it was decompressed, put into the ARC. Then if it paged out to the L2 ARC, it would actually be compressed and then written to that. Now the L2 ARC can just copy the already compressed one, and it reduces RAM use even further. The largest size of indirect blocks possible was increased from 16 kilobytes to 128 kilobytes, and speculative prefetching of indirect blocks is now performed. This makes a big difference in how many, in the efficiency of splitting up blocks. And they also improved the ordering of space allocation so that you're more likely to put data in order and so on. And then the bit I worked on was implementing SHA-512. So in ZFS, you've had support for Fletcher 2, Fletcher 4, and SHA-256 as your hashing algorithms. SHA-512 on 64-bit machines is actually faster to calculate a hash than SHA-256 because the word size is bigger, so you're eating a bigger chunk at a time. But in the block pointer for ZFS, there's only room for 256 bits of checksum. So we used the standard called SHA-512 truncated to 256. So it's not actually just the first half of a SHA-512. It's the SHA-512 algorithm, but using a different initial value. And so it comes out to a different hash, and then we just use the first half of that. So this allows you to get the 50 to 60% performance improvement of using a SHA-512, but making it fit in the SHA-256 space. And then separately, I also implemented brought in an implementation of Skeen, which was Bruce Schneier's hashing algorithm that was a candidate to be SHA-3, although it didn't win. But it has a couple of unique things about it. It's really, really fast because it's unlike SHA, which was actually designed, I think, was it big endian? It's the opposite endianness of x86. Skeen was specifically optimized for regular, AMD 64 or x86 computers. And it has the ability to be an HMAC. So it basically, you can seed in a value when you start a Skeen. And so it means that with a different seed, the same file will come out with a different hash. So in ZFS, this is used. There's basically a salt that is come up with when you, I think, when you create a pool or when you first activate the Skeen feature. And that is unique for each different pool. So this means that if you're using dedupe and I'm using dedupe, we're not going to have the same hashes. This is good because if I'm an attacker and I maybe installed FreeBSD updates a couple days before you, and I know the hash of one of these files that's going to be included in the update, if I could brute force and come up with a file that had the same hash, I could cause that to be downloaded onto your server or whatever. And now when you run FreeBSD update, you're going to be like, oh, I already have that file. I don't need to write it. Or other attacks of that nature. And so this allows, if you're using the Skeen hashing algorithm, it'll mean that your...
That's not a possible.
Yeah, your checksum hashes are unique to your pool, and they'll still work the same, but it will prevent any kind of collision attack from being possible by just having a secret salt as part of your hashes.
So question, are all these things incorrect as of right now?
Actually, I think compressed arc and the Skeen stuff are all in 11.0.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think almost all of these, if not all of them, made it into 11.0.
And there's no ZFS properties or anything you have to set to turn them on. I think these are just all.
So what you have to do like zpool upgrade if you're upgrading, but if you build one on 11, it'll already have it, but it's not used until you turn it on the first time. So you'd actually have to set, ZFS set checksum equals Skeen or equals SHA-512. Just if you expect to be able to import this pool on something older, like FreeBSD 10.3 or Linux or something, then you don't want to do that. You want to only use features that are the lowest common denominator of all the systems you might want to import the pool on. Now, most times you only want to import the pool on the machine it's in, so it's fine. But yeah, that's all available there.
Okay. Well, very, very cool. Thanks, Allan. Yep. Okay, heading over to the Beastie Bits next, so we'll go ahead and get started with that. So first up, we have a URL you want to go check. It's actually a really long write-up on how to host your own private GitHub using GOGs, and it looks like this is on FreeBSD 11. They talk a little about PCBSD, but they're talking about how TrueOS is rolling now. That may not work as well for them anymore, but you can definitely go roll this on a stock vanilla FreeBSD if you'd like to set up your own GitHub alternative. Yeah. I know they were down a little bit this morning, so maybe some people will be interested in that.
But yeah, and I see it talking about using jails, ZFS in jails, IO cage, wide jailing the Git server, and so on.
Yeah, definitely some good stuff there. So go check that out if that's something you'll need for either your home or personal development or your workplace.
Yeah, they even have how to do... safe upgrades using ZFS clones to try out the upgrade in a second jail, and then only if it works you roll things forward. Lots of interesting things like that. And even doing Jenkins and in a jail
nice.
and integrating it with GOGs.
Taking it to the next level. That's good stuff. Okay. So next up, we have a story actually over on Slashdot. It's been around a few places, though, talking about how NVIDIA is now adding telemetry to their latest drivers. So I've read through this. I haven't seen the indication this is in Linux yet, so maybe somebody in the chat room can correct me if they've seen that this is showing up on Linux or the BSD drivers for that matter, but definitely in the Windows drivers. And man, it just seems like you can't get away from tracking these days. This is a little concerning, but I would like to hear if anybody's seen if this affects drivers outside of the Windows family or not. Hopefully not. Praying, fingers crossed.
Well, yeah, I think it would have to be like a separate utility and be a little too obvious and removable on an open source operating system. Although
I would hope so.
If I think back to the days of, I think it was Windows Vista first came out, it turned out that like 60% or 40% of all the blue screens that Vista had were caused by graphics drivers from ATI and NVIDIA.
Oh, nice.
And the telemetry helped them figure that out. And it's like, turns out that while Vista's getting a bad name, it's all because of the graphics drivers.
Sure. Hey, that happens.
Yes.
But at the same time, I'm a big fan of my system not talking to people that I didn't tell it to.
Yes, but at the same time, the telemetry can be very helpful. It's like, but that's why it should be opt-in, right? Like,
yes.
Colin's got the panic mail that sends him an encrypted email when your system panics, or rather, it sends you an encrypted email that you can forward to him if you want. Super paranoid on the privacy bit about why your system panicked, and then he can do statistics and maybe actually find a common panic that a lot of people are seeing, but each person only sees it maybe once ever.
Sure.
But when you see that 100 different people have seen this panic with this backtrace, it's like, oh, there's obviously a problem on line 1042 of this source file. So yeah, telemetry can be very useful. And I saw some really interesting stuff with it at MeetBSD even. Penzura makes a cloud ZFS appliance thing, and they're collecting the crashes they were seeing and finding bugs they'd introduced when they modified ZFS.
Sure. So, I'm just a big fan of transparency when it comes to this stuff. You should always let your customers know or your users know exactly what's being reported and to whom and where and who that's shared with.
And that's what Colin's Panic Mail utility does. It actually emails you, and then you get to look at the email and decide if you want to forward it to Colin or not.
Sure. Okay, and lastly, we want to mention real quick, upcoming Knox bug meeting out in my area is actually happening here pretty soon. It looks like the 29th of November. We have Warren Block of the FreeBSD docs team is going to be here talking with us. And there's also a write-up on the side about the PackBSD talk we had just recently. So good stuff. Check that out if you're anywhere in the Knoxville regional area, metro area. Come on out. We'll love to meet with you next week.
Well, Warren's from 2 weeks from now. South Dakota, so he's making quite a trip to come out there, isn't he?
He's coming out, so he's going to be out here. He actually is working with iX now, so he's going to be out here for a docs team summit they're doing that week anyway. So it coincided and worked out well. So that'll be good. We just will enjoy his talk, of course. Okay, so we got feedback and questions to get to in a moment here, but really quick, our last sponsor this week is going to be Tarsnap. The website for that is tarsnap.com/BSDNow, where you want to go get signed up and start doing your backups immediately. Don't wait on this. This is something too valuable and important. You need to do backups, do them properly, do them off-site, and do them in a way where you can trust nobody on the remote end is looking at what you're backing up. I don't care if you think it's personal or not. You never know what you might have accidentally leaked in that data. Oh, I backed up my home directory. Oh, are my SSH keys in? Oh, crap, right?
Yep.
I mean, who knows, right? Stuff happens. So you'd just rather have the peace of mind of knowing that no matter what I sent up to the cloud and got backed up, I can trust isn't going to get read by somebody who shouldn't be reading it.
Yes, and it's the cloud. There's no way to delete stuff and make sure it was deleted because you know what? Your Dropbox or your backup company there, they have backups.
Yeah, of the backups, of the backups.
And they have replicas. And then they have failed hard drives that, maybe they don't properly dispose of. And so on and so on. And so encrypting your data and you being the only person with the key and you being able to destroy the key is the only way for it to work.
You almost have to wonder how many places replicate to how many other places. So it's like, okay, you start at Dropbox and then it ends up in an Amazon EC2 somewhere. And it's like, how many people, how many companies and employees? And now you have all that extra layer of security vulnerability, right? It's like, even though they may not attack your original point of origin for your backups, who knows if they can still get your data or not by breaking into a completely unrelated third party.
Dropbox encrypts everything, but they encrypt everything once with their key. It's like, well, that doesn't really protect me from Dropbox or the government or them backing up to Amazon. Whereas Tarsnap encrypts with your key that never leaves your computer unless you copy it somewhere. And
don't do that.
Well, you need to print it and laminate it and put it somewhere, because if you lose the key, you lose your data.
You're done.
But that's a feature.
Not a design flaw. That's how it's supposed to work, folks.
It's the only way to make sure that you can delete your data is by making sure that if you lose the key, your data is gone forever. Is so that you can purposely lose your key.
Yeah, we had a backup company where I wrote some encryption software, and I remember somebody encrypted a bunch of tapes and then promptly forgot their key, their password. And they called us up. They're like, so you guys have a backup copy of... I'm like, no, like, you're not understanding. Like, the whole point of this is we don't want to read your, we don't want to have access to your data. We don't want to know what's on that and have nothing to do with that. It's your key. You own it. You're responsible for it. So take good care of your keys, like Allan said, laminate, put it away. Scan it, print it out, do whatever you got to do to keep it in a safe place. But check out Tarsnap today, because it really is backups for the truly paranoid. You can compile it yourself. So if you don't even trust binaries from, quote unquote, your favorite distro, you can build it yourself so you can trust it's doing exactly what it's supposed to be. Okay, so we got feedback and questions to get to. I actually don't know the answer to this first one here, Allan, but it's William writing, and he said, what's the song you guys use for the theme music for BSDNow? He said, I really like it, but I can't figure out what it came from with Shazam and Midori. Thanks for the great show, guys. I don't know what it's called.
Yeah, so our old producer, TJ, picked it in the beginning. It's something Japanese.
It's an anime thing.
Well,
and I like anime.
Well, it's not specifically from an anime. It's some like small Japanese band where he could actually get in contact with them and get their permission to use it. And that's probably why it's not in Shazam, because it's just some... I might have the original files somewhere, or log of the conversation from 3 and a bit years ago when we picked it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But yeah, I just let him go. It's like, yeah, you can go ahead and pick the music. It's like,
whatever music you want.
Yeah, it was fine.
The nice thing is, me and Allan don't have to hear it. We just get to do
the last time I listened to it was a long time ago.
Like the first month we did the show.
Well,
it's been
at some point I watched an episode on YouTube for something. I think I was showing it to someone, and it happened to have the music.
Okay. But yeah, sorry about that. If we do find it, we'll let you know.
Yeah, sorry.
Good luck with that.
So next, Ray asks about mounting his cell phone. He says, I have a question about mounting the file system on a phone in TrueOS. How does one go about doing this? I know on my Ubuntu Mate desktop that I just have to plug in the phone via the USB cable and click allow, and it's mounted. Is there something special I have to do to get mounted in TrueOS?
Well, then he also says he's currently driving a semi across the U.S. I hope you weren't texting and driving or emailing and driving at the same time. Anyway, it really depends on the type of phone. You didn't say what it is. Is this an Android with mass storage mode, in which case it should show up in the mount tray as like DA0 or something, and then you can click and it should mount via FAT32.
For those, it's basically the same as plugging in a USB stick.
Exactly. If it's an iPhone, that's a whole nother ball game. So I guess it really depends. I think MTP was the protocol. It's been a while since I've had to do this. So I forget which ports or packages let you mess around with MTP. Have you done it recently, Allan?
No, I don't own an iPhone. I have an Android, and I just plug it in mass storage mode, and it's like a USB stick.
Exactly.
And copy things back
That's
and forth.
how mine works, too. And I remember doing this once with my wife's iPhone years ago and trying to make it work. I don't even think I ever got it to work. It was... And I don't know if maybe now it's easier or whatever. I don't have a better answer without knowing more information about your particular smartphone.
Maybe somebody that uses an iPhone like Dan will know the answer to this and be able to tell us.
Right. So what magic set of tools do you use to get that working? I'm just assuming maybe it's an iPhone, since you say it didn't. It sounds like it's not auto-detecting it. If it does mass storage, it should just auto-detect it, and you'll get a nice prompt
on
saying,
my phone, once you plug in the cable, you have to go into the phone and tell it you want mass storage mode, not just charging. Because my phone by default doesn't just expose its storage to anything you plug it into.
Yes, you have to click a button.
Yeah. But once you do that, it should just show up as a USB stick, basically.
Okay. Very, very cool. Okay. Well, yeah, if you get more information, we'll see if we can help you out there, Ray. So next up is Ron, who writes in, says, hey guys, so I want to try TrueOS on my AMD machines. However, the install hangs. I remember somebody else had a similar problem and wrote into the show. I'm using a Radeon video card. I currently have OpenBSD 6.0 installed. He attached the D message from OpenBSD. He said, I did check the GitHub repo to post the issue, but he did not see an install repo. He said any suggestions of what info you need and where to post the issue would be helpful. So just really quick to answer that, if you go to GitHub/TrueOS and TrueOS Core, that's where we're using for bug tracking. So file it right there. He says, I do have a spare NVIDIA card laying around, but I don't want to pull out of my tower, take it apart and put the card in, reboot. He said, I'll let you know how it goes. And he said he had an ATI Radeon HD 6450. That wasn't working. So the Radeon stuff is still really experimental at the moment in FreeBSD. I know the new work that came in has changed a little bit about that. To be honest, I don't own any ATI/AMD cards anymore.
I haven't bought an ATI card since before the Radeon numbers had HD in them. I think my last one was a 9650 or something. Or 9600 Pro Ultra. That's what I had. A 9600 Pro Ultra.
Yeah, that gives you an idea of the age. Yeah. That's about the age when I stopped.
That's more than 10 years ago.
NVIDIA. NVIDIA cards have been pretty much all I use now for my desktop.
I did own some Radeons for a couple of months when I was doing Bitcoin mining. But I sold them.
Yes. And I had some of those as well, and I never plugged them into a BSD box. They were connected to another system for Bitcoin mining. Yeah. But he did follow up with an email shortly after where he mentioned that he did put the NVIDIA card in and it worked fine. So it sounded like he solved his own problem. But yeah, for those out there struggling with ATI AMD cards, a cheap NVIDIA may be the way to go at the moment.
There's work ongoing, but no idea when that'll,
Yeah, that's a whole other ballpark. Okay, so next up is Kurt. So you want me to read this? You can answer it, Allan? Okay. Hi, Allan and Chris. This question is mostly directed to Allan. Thank you both for the show. I listen to it pretty much every week. Here's my situation. I'm mostly a new user of ZFS, and I've pretty well mastered the topics in the first book by Allan and Michael. I have a collection of hard disks that contain non-ZFS clones of my user data from various time points. I'd like to turn those into ZFS snapshots so I can get rid of this collection of boat anchor disks in a box while still preserving the ability to reach back in time to pull out an old file if necessary. I had originally thought that I would bring them into ZFS as separate data sets with deduplication turned on. He said I even started down that path, but quickly found this was overwhelming my computer's RAM and ability to be responsive, even though the dedupe factor was pretty high. He said, I learned why friends don't let friends dedupe. Yeah, that can be painful. He said, so I'm thinking of another way to accomplish this. I thought I'd run it by you for feasibility. I thought that the one way to accomplish this would be to bring the old clone into the ZFS as a data set, then create a snapshot of that data set, then rsync the next oldest clone of the data set, take another snapshot. I would continue forward in this way, doing rsync and taking snapshots until the final rsync would be my current user data. At that point, I have a series of snapshots going back in time representing each of the hard disks. Since the user data doesn't change much from slice to slice in time, this shouldn't take up much space, right? And since ZFS doesn't have to manage a dedupe table, it also shouldn't eat all my RAM, right? The question being is if I want to pull a file from an old snapshot, I can just go into the hidden directory for the ZFS snapshot and grab the file. If I want to recreate the entire slice, perhaps because I want access to a large number of files, I could do a ZFS send and load that slice into a new data set. I'm not entirely schooled on the possibilities of send yet. He said, I haven't bought the second Jude Lucas book on ZFS. I also like that the old snapshots are read-only and are not subject to accidental erasure or change. Thanks for any advice you may have or pitfalls you want to point out.
Right. So, yes, basically make a new data set, put the oldest data on it, snapshot it, then rsync newer data over it. Any data that doesn't change won't take up new space, but the changes will, and you can just keep walking forward. If you want to access files, there is the hidden.zfs thing, but you can also mount a snapshot. So if you do mount -t ZFS, the full data set path of the snapshot and some directory, you can just mount that snapshot to that directory and it's read only, but you can use it. And then if you want to work with the data, rather than having to send it, which will actually make it take that much more space, you can create a clone. So if you do ZFS clone that snapshot to a new data set, it'll give you a new data set that you can change with a copy of all the data from that snapshot time, that point in time, but you can actually change it, and it'll only take up space for the changes. But yes, you can ZFS send if you want, but most of the time, if you're on the same box, a clone makes more sense. But yeah.
Okay, I think he's on the right path. I just don't envy him having to do all that manual copying. You need to write a script to do that. That sounds like a total pain in the rear.
If you got to manually flip hard drives each time, it's not so bad. Right? It's just a long-running rsync 5 or 6 times. But yeah, that should let you turn it. Yeah, so dedupe takes a lot of RAM. In the next couple of years, the ZFS feature will be available where you can offload your dedupe table to like an NVMe device. So you'll just have a dedicated SSD or NVMe that does nothing but hold the dedupe table. And then there's a dedupe throttle feature that hopefully will come with that, so that if you fill that dedupe table SSD, everything after that stops being deduped until you get more dedupe table space.
Okay. Very cool. I'll let you read the last one here, Alan. We have a celebrity you wrote in. So what happened here?
Yes. So Matt Dillon, who's the creator of the DragonFlyBSD project, heard our little news item a couple of weeks ago about Dragonfly's vkernels. And in particular, we were like, we don't know that much about them. So he wrote us an explanation.
Yeah, what is that?
So he says, hello, Alan and Chris. Love your show as always. That's really great to hear.
Nice.
Why haven't you done an interview yet?
I know. You need to come on the show. Come on, man.
He says,
Anyway,
on
stuff.
episode 164, you had some questions about Dragonfly's vkernels. vkernels are Dragonfly's original attempt at implementing virtualization without actually needing to implement virtualization. Dragonfly itself does not have a fully fledged hardware virtualization abstraction like the one you see in Linux and FreeBSD. Eventually, we might port one, but it isn't a strong point for us. I'd rather focus on system performance. I would like Dragonfly to run well under virtualized environments as a guest. Some of our devs are interested in porting a hosting capability from one of the other BSDs once they have something that works well. Dragonfly's vkernel is essentially just the Dragonfly kernel compiled as a user mode application, meaning the vkernel drivers can just use normal system calls to implement disk and network I/O. The real Dragonfly kernel provides a virtualized page table abstraction, something like VMX, but not actually requiring the hardware, and execution context management. And it's pretty much all the vkernel needs. The vkernel implementation is pretty good, though the PMAP implementation on platforms /vkernel64 currently uses a global lock and is significantly behind the real kernel in terms of multiprocessor performance. The intent of a vkernel is to make it easier to test Dragonfly's kernel features in a user mode context for debugging purposes, and to provide a layer of security for people who don't trust normal user-based compartmentalization. And of course, it is much easier to manage resource capabilities or caps with a vkernel. But as with any virtualized system, the trade-off against performance is fairly severe.
Sure.
In any case, the cow feature simply mmaps a disk image with the map private plus read-write flags instead of using pread and pwrite. It's great to manage many vkernels using a single base system image. Since multiple disk images can be specified, and one can, of course, use NFS even, this does not prevent having a second normal write-back image for data. Having easy base system replication coupled with a writable mount is an incredibly useful feature to have, much easier to work with than, say, read-only NFS mounts. He says, it isn't Union FS. I'm not saving the changes anywhere. It would be fairly easy to do so, but I think it would be easier. It would be even easier to not bother and simply instrument the system running under the vkernel to spool off everything it wants to retain across reboots to a non-cow partition like an NFS mount or a regular storage image.
That's interesting.
Thank you for the very good explanation.
Yeah, I appreciate you sending that in. That's really an interesting idea. So, yeah, we'll have to keep an eye on that. How would you describe that? Somewhere between virtualization and jail?
Yeah, it's more virtualized. It's like jails and rump kernels kind of mushed together.
Yeah.
But yeah,
that's neat.
Closer to jails than virtualization, but closer to virtualization than jails.
With a kernel. Yeah, exactly. It's this weird in between. That's cool though.
It's, best of both worlds, ideally, right?
And plus, I'm geeking out that Matt watches the show and even bothered to send us this response. So thank you, Matt. We appreciate it. And of course, at some point, we will track you down and hopefully get you on here for an interview so you can tell everyone about the stuff in person. This is really cool. But again, thanks for writing in. We appreciate it. Okay, and that brings us to a close for this week's episode. So, of course, we're going to remind you, if you have questions, comments, show ideas, topics, stories you want to hear mentioned on the show, send it to feedback@bsdnow.tv. That's the only place we monitor, so we would appreciate it if you'd send stuff there. You can try and tweet us and do whatever, but we may not see it. So that's the only place we'll be for sure able to see your comments. May not get to it right away. We do have actually quite a backlog of emails that have come in. So that's a good thing. Keep them coming in, and we're pulling them and pushing them into future episodes. So we'll get caught up at some point. But keep sending stuff in, and of course, we'll look forward to having a new episode with you same time next week.